something in the midst of the mystic, let's say, down in the depths of the metaphysical, that speaks of something that's much more Christian than any of us would have possibly imagined. It looks to me like you've taken a Christian tilt. Like, what the hell do you make of that? And how do you know that that's just not another form of self-aggrandizing falsehood?
The Christian religion.
Right in.
The conservative internet celebs are becoming Catholic. Why do they do it? Oh, I don't know if you saw this. I read on Reddit that Joe Rogan has been flirting with Christianity lately. Have you heard of whether there's any truth to that?
I would say that I very occasionally watch it if he has someone on that I'm interested in hearing from, but I don't regularly watch or listen.
Is it Catholicism specifically, or do you say Christians are becoming Catholics?
Not for him.
I think not for him, but most of them are becoming Catholic specifically.
Catholic specifically, eh?
Russell Brand, you heard laughing in the intro.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to do this episode, if we can, without saying right-wing or grifter. Because, as true as it may be, it sloganizes the thought. And I think this truly. It's too easy as an explanation. So if we
I totally agree. I totally agree.
It's lazy.
So if we can avoid that nomenclature, just consider it mentioned, okay? We've already said it.
Oh, well, I mean, it's not...
You have to take a shot if you say it.
Well, it's not hard for me to agree with that because I already think that. Like, I don't actually think that either of the two people we're watching or we're talking about today are...
the two people watching. Hey,
the two, yeah, sorry.
Mom and Dad.
I don't think that the two people we're talking about today, I don't think any like intellectually honest person can say that they're right-wing grifters. I don't think that that's accurate. So I'm with you.
No, people are looking at religion and, well, Catholicism specifically, not just as a religion, but as a way of life to save us. Dawkins is bringing it up, saying, not that he believes it, but that, like, I'm a cultural Christian. Zizek bringing it up, saying he's an atheist Christian.
Yeah, Zizek's new Christian atheism stuff. And Zizek even quotes Dawkins was saying, like, all religions are whatever, but like at least Christianity's better than like Islam and stuff like that. Like,
yeah,
Dawkins still like makes distinctions, even though he's one of those old school atheists.
A bunch of guys that Peterson also mentioned, and a woman that we're going to read. But let's just ignore that for a moment, because back in the day, here's my intro spiel. Back in the day, one of the GOAT philosophers was getting into some Eastern religion that had not been really thoroughly studied, where he was from in Germany in the 1820s or so. And this philosopher lined up all the religions. We got Hinduism, Buddhism, Greek religion, Platonism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Christianity. And he looked at all of these religions next to each other as systems of metaphysics. So not anthropologically or historically, just as systems of metaphysics. And he concluded there's parts of all of them that kind of make sense. They check this box that coheres with experience, or they check that box. And then he gets to Christianity. And he goes, all these other ones have something going on for them, but this one I can say without a doubt is total fucking bullshit.
And he seems to be saying that about actually existing Christianity too.
We're gonna do that already.
If I could use that term.
There's no worse explanation for the state of affairs of our world than Christianity, and Platonism is the second worst. Judaism is pretty bad, at least at the start, but it redeems itself because it kind of says our lives are just punishment for someone else's crime. That would be the crime of Adam and Eve. But the God is love stuff and God has a loving plan for your life, get the fuck out of here with that one. And this philosopher's name was Arthur Schopenhauer.
Yeah, he seems to think he calls himself like the true Christian, or his doctrine is like the true Christianity too. So he thinks there's something in there, but the way people believe in it and practice it, there's some flaw in there, in like the metaphysical belief system there.
Christianity can be true if you don't believe that God exists.
Right.
That's the conclusion.
Yeah.
But first, one of the converts Peterson mentioned is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who became a Christian. She was raised Muslim, then became atheist, and now, why is she converting? I want to pause for effect. She's converting because of China and woke ideology.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's pretty funny. So I remember Ayaan Hirsi Ali when I was in my new atheist phase in the mid 2000s as a teenager. And I was consuming a lot of Richard Dawkins content, although I guess there wasn't YouTube back then. Just like, or maybe there was around that time as well. It was probably in that period when it was new.
Mid 2000s.
She was like kind of considered kind of one of their, had a compatible story because she came in. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she was a member of parliament for a little while in the Netherlands. She had immigrated to Netherlands, I think, from Kenya, and was just this like hardcore kind of atheist. Yes. Oh, was it Somalia? Sorry, Somalia. She might have lived in Kenya at one point. She mentions it in her essay. And she was part of that trend for sure. So it's kind of fun. And I remember like Sam Harris had her on his podcast several times. And it's just so funny to see her like being part of the new atheists. And I feel like, so the reason I got interested in this when I noticed this is because we have had conversations on this podcast about how interesting it is to see like the new atheist crowd kind of become this like hyper anti-woke crowd. And I feel like that sort of fits in with that. And it's like, and it seems like one of her main rationale, originally her rationale for being an atheist was like definitely post 9/11 fear of Islam. But then, the other part of it now is this wokeness stuff, it seems like. And I guess she's kind of come to this conclusion that secularity is not a sufficient weapon against wokeism, which is kind of amusing to me and interesting to me. So I don't know what you guys thought about that.
Not here. It's China.
Having a mystical experience is kind of the usual thing.
No. And never preserve Western civilization.
Doesn't she say it, though, at one point at the end in the article? She does say something like...
she needs meaning.
Yeah, what? Yeah, she needs meaning. So she does kind of come to the conclusion that like life is... she says, I would not be truthful if I attributed my embrace of Christianity solely to the realization that atheism is too weak and divisive of a doctrine to fortify us against our menacing foes, i.e. wokeism, China,
Iran,
Russia, Islam. She says, look, but the God hole, the void left by the retreat of the church, has merely been filled by a jumble of quasi-religious dogmas, I guess all these other things. So she says that she needs something to fill that God hole, basically, that was left in her because, she was raised as, which again, I think the other part of my sort of thesis about this is that, in a way, what we're seeing here is like, okay, when she originally took up atheism, a lot of people accuse the new atheists of being their own kind of religion. And in a way, like, isn't she kind of proving that point by being like, well, I was taking up atheism as a religion, but that's not working anymore. So I need a new one. Right. And it's like,
which is the most postmodern. You're not converting. She never makes an argument that this is true, right? That Christianity is the true religion, that Christ was resurrected from the dead and united with God and blah, blah, blah. Saying to you, her husband is CIA. So, okay, sorry. He's Hoover Institute.
As religious and then oppose it in a way, like, like money is the religion of capitalism. So like, you always have like Benjamin quotes to that effect, for instance. And then so we have to critique this sort of kind of religious capitalism. And now it's like wokeism is like a kind of religion too. But I guess this is a bit different. This is like the argument that wokeism promotes this like tribalism and that Christianity or Catholicism helps you sort of like rise above that and enter into this like universal community of believers.
Yeah, well, she said, and she starts the essay, by the way, by quoting Bertrand Russell's essay about why I'm not a Christian. And this is her kind of response. It's like, why I'm a Christian. And so it goes through all those reasons. And she says towards the end, Russell and other activist atheists believed that with the rejection of God, we would enter an age of reason and intelligent humanism, right? So maybe that's like age of reason and intelligent humanism is maybe this sort of fantasy that the new atheist, the way of taking up atheism with religiosity, like that's kind of the paradise or whatever. But then she kind of goes on to say it's actually the world has instead become filled by a jumble of irrational quasi-religious dogmas. And I think she's obviously thinking about wokeism here, etc.
Yeah, there you go. So it stands still. It's kind of a false religion. And then here's the true religion.
Isn't philosophy, especially a la Bertrand Russell, it's supposed to be like what's true? This isn't your religion's not a strategic consumer decision. It's like
it's supposed to be what is the case.
I can't accept the premise, given the state of the world, that God is the final cause of this, so I reject the claim.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's why there's definitely a distinction between a certain kind of new atheism and philosophy in the brand of Bertrand Russell. I think, right? It's those two are not the same thing. But the other thing that I picked up on in the essay, which we've talked about as well on this podcast, is the invocation of Judeo-Christian values and Judeo-Christian culture. Your favorite, Hills.
I love Judeo-Christian culture. I love that they're mashed together too, despite the fact that like the Judeo bit of that until Israel.
She mentions it though. Did you notice that she does mention both? She says something
what
about
does she
like
say?
She says she says, to me, this freedom of conscience and speech is perhaps the greatest benefit of Western civilization. It does not come naturally to man. It is the product of centuries of debate within Jewish and Christian communities. It was these debates that advanced science and reason, diminished cruelty, suppressed superstition, and built institutions to order and protect life, while guaranteeing freedom for as many as possible. Unlike Islam, Christianity outgrew its dogmatic stage. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Christianity outgrew its anti-Judeo stage, which was most of it.
So again, there's like a deep-seated like chauvinism in the impulse to adopt Christianity. It's like it's the best, it's the best value system that's been promoted so far, that's been produced. And it's always like the explanations are like, oh, during COVID, everyone was like in lock-in and kind of bored and came to this realization that they need something more in their lives. And then more generally, Western culture is like, doesn't have values. It's nihilistic. It's consumerist. Yeah. It's individualistic. It's capitalism loves all these things and it promotes, I don't know. They probably wouldn't say capitalism though, but they would definitely quote the kind of nihilism maybe that seems to be very widespread. No one believes or cares about anything.
Yeah, I mean, she says, also quoting her, in this nihilist vacuum, the challenge before us becomes civilizational. This is, I think, capturing her like strategic Christianity, if we want to call it that, or political Christianity. It's very odd. She says, we can't withstand China, Russia, and Iran if we can't explain to our populations why it matters that we do. We can't fight woke ideology if we can't defend the civilization that it is determined to destroy. Whoa. And we can't counter Islamism with purely secular tools. To win the hearts and minds of Muslims here in the West, we have to offer them something more than videos on TikTok. So,
I converted cynically so that you should too. I don't believe. I don't care if Christ rose from the dead or not. That's irrelevant. It's we have to win.
If you care about Western civilization and all the institutional values.
It's strange though, because she does, I think, kind of imply that she does believe in it robustly, but just doesn't really unpack it here. Because she says, the meaning hole, like the kind of God-sized hole is her life without faith was difficult. But then she doesn't really unpack that. And then she just goes on to like, she's almost offering, I don't know. It's weird. It's like some version. Well, it's not really a Pascal's wager, but it is kind of like trying to offer a sort of strategic argument for why you should buy into it.
It's very instrumental, isn't it?
But then why Christianity? Like Christianity was the beta release and it had all these problems, like especially the Trinity and especially the problem of evil. And in a lot of ways, like Islam is an improvement on this. Like we're not going to have a giant book written by 100 different people. We're going to have one book written by one guy who's the last prophet until the final final one. But we got rid of the Jesus is his own dad bit, which no one understood, and many people have spent a lot of ink trying to solve. Jesus wasn't his own dad. He was just like a really good guy. And then more importantly, to what religion's actually for, how do you live? Well, you pray as much as you can. You help the poor as much as you can. You seek knowledge. You go to Mecca if you can make it there. Don't eat bacon. There you go. And if you can't do any of these things, you try your best. But if you accidentally break one of the rules, God's going to get it because he knows everything. So this seems to me to be like an update to Christianity where we never know who's getting in. We have to figure out how Jesus is his own dad. And then there's like the problem of evil,
is the
right?
good.
The good is separate from God. It's not just God. And I don't know, Islam kind of solved that problem by saying whatever happens, God's real existence. So we're not going to say, why did this happen? If you just follow it, do what you can here, you'll probably slip through in the end.
So this new cell on Owens by Owens is like, you know, if you hate China and communism, if you hate wokeism, and if you're an Islamophobe, then Christianity is the religion for you. It's a very negative, resentful kind of reasoning.
Yeah.
Which is very different from others. Russell Brand's take, it seems. It's a little different.
Well,
and it's very different from Schopenhauer's kind of take on religion as well, which centers on suffering and asceticism and turning away from the world, not like using it as a tool in your battles against things you don't like.
Yeah, I mean, I find the Ayaan Hirsi Ali article just especially objectionable for all the reasons that Pills was talking about. Because for me, it's offensive to like intellectual honesty. It's just like it's purely strategic. It's like Pills said, it's not about like what's the argument for something being the case. It's just this is a good weapon to use against things that I don't like. And even that argument itself is so strange. Like, but like, you know, especially someone who was, you know, I found it fascinating just because like, I know you guys were probably less familiar with her than I was, but I remember her being like, you know, selling herself as this soldier for intellectual honesty, right? Being like honest about like what is, you know, atheism makes sense because, you know, Christianity, those other things don't make sense. And it used to be more on the argument that there's no reason why are so many people believing in this thing that we have no reason to believe in. And it was like, at least, you know, as problematic as new atheism was, I think that when it was, you know, at its best, I suppose it was focusing on that intellectual puzzle, just like, you know, why are people believing in this thing that there's no evidence for, right? And supposedly, you know, being a kind of, you know, a woman from like an impoverished country, you know, at the time it was felt like a very progressive story. Like here's a woman from you know, a very impoverished background that had very regressive views on women's place in society. And here she comes. I think she became a member of parliament, you know, this real success story, and is like this champion for, you know, intellectual openness. And then now she's like making like what I see as a blatantly intellectually dishonest argument. It's just so weird. It's hilarious.
Well, you have to question some things, like whether we have an invisible dad in the sky, but asking if the American criminal justice system is racist, that's a bridge way too far. We need to be civilized after all.
I got my problems with wokeism, but that's just so weird. I mean, I would never become a Christian because a strategic Christian I mean, not that I'm as worried about wokeism as she is, but it's just crazy to me to be like, let me, you know, insofar as you think that wokeism has dogmatic and like it, like, you know, commitments to things like normative commitments that are strategic, you know, then you just become a mirror of it and you become like a Christian. I don't know. It's just so fucking weird.
Now, not to be too conspiratorial, but there is, you know, her husband works for the Hoover Institute. And we know that these conservative, you know, internet media companies are funded darkly. So maybe this is the new PSYOP. It's like convert to Catholicism. And I don't really understand what the end game is there or how convincing this is, but the advertisement is just belong to something old, belong to history, belong to something that has a long contiguity, and help us defeat China.
And it seems like it could be a holdover too from like Cold War mentality, it's like, you know, the Christian West versus the atheistic communist East, and you know, throw that Islamophobia in there, and great, you have a new like ideological Maginot Line of like Christians versus the East, the West versus the rest again. It's just like a new version of that. But like a lot of people, you know, it's all about people's experience, right? Hers is so saturated with like political polemics that, of course, like, you know, you need something more in your life. You frame it in terms of what kinds of struggles you've been involved in and how it's going to help you in those. Like, it's the same thing when a lot of Christians read Christopher Hitchens, and I don't know what, his letters to a young contrarian or something like that, and they left Catholicism because their experience of Catholicism was like stifling, and it was rigid, and they like, maybe in their family, you know, they maybe they had an overbearing Christian father or something like that, and they read that stuff and it liberated them. Now this is another, you know, going back in the other direction. It's liberating from all these tribalistic struggles. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but it seems like it could be something there.
We got bored of being too free, which I will use to segue to Schopenhauer, because we want to know why Christianity is the most unserious religion.
Wait, before we go there, can I just add one additional biographical detail about Ayaan Hirsi Ali? So she in 2004, she wrote the script and provided the voiceover for a short film that was like kind of critical of the treatment of women in Islamic society called Submission, directed by Theo van Gogh, like a Dutch. She was in the Netherlands, and that guy, the director, was actually murdered because of that film by like so like this is also part of her story, just like to add further context. So I think like, so she wrote this thing being critical of Islam, and then some like Islamic extremist murdered, kind of like in the same way that what's his name, that guy who always gets, there's been like 2 attempts on his life now.
Salman Rushdie.
Salman
exactly.
Rushdie. Yeah,
that kind of situation, you know.
Yeah. I was gonna say too, I can see this coming with Joe Rogan, because I do recall, you know, on the mystical experience front, that he's into DMT, and he was in that documentary over a decade ago when DMT was being called like the spirit molecule, and like kind of coming out of that.
I don't think that Joe Rogan would ever become a strategic Christian the way that Ayaan Hirsi Ali is, but he might become more like what's his name, Russell Brand is becoming, kind of like.
And what's Russell Brand becoming?
Well, that's an open question.
Yeah, he's baptized as a Catholic very recently in a ceremony, in a private ceremony with Bear Grylls involved too.
Who's that?
Bear Grylls. Bear Grylls is that survivalist, that former SAS British survivalist guy,
like a reality
Christian
TV show guy.
Kind of, yeah. He goes out, like the Canadian version was what's his name, Les Stroud from Survivor Man, kind of like that.
Yeah.
Like he goes out with cameras. I think Grylls has a crew with him when he does it though, and he just kind of survives in various places.
And he has celebrities on with him to show them like how to survive. So like, for example, I think he had President Obama on once, and like they were out like, and he was showing him how to survive like for days in the wilderness.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm getting
army
this
training.
is too much. I'm tired. The simulation just reproduces itself.
We'll segue back into what's been called irrationalism, or Schopenhauer's philosophy.
Yeah.
Schopenhauer. Well, I want to do this without getting into the problem of evil as much as possible, because we'd be just going around 2,000 years of history trying to explain the problem of evil. But the problem of evil, in short, I think it's just like the reason that Christianity is for sure wrong. Christians have spent a long time debating this, like 2,000 years, basically. If God is all powerful and he's good and he's all knowing, this means that he knows where evil is. He has the power to eradicate evil, and he's good. So evil is the exact opposite of him. So why, when we look around, do we see evil and suffering if we live in a world that's both created and then in some sense managed and then in a third sense redeemed by God? If he cares, then why is there this overwhelming evidence that to the contrary, that people are the opposite of his nature is everywhere, and his nature is elusive and mysterious?
Yeah, that's good. We don't need to go too deeply into it.
There's a logical Cirque du Soleil to explain why evil exists, and I think Alvin Plantinga is kind of the free will. Like we invited evil into the world, so ultimately it's our fault that we suffer anyway. But this goes back. Leibniz has a big argument
Leibniz
about
is
it.
the big target here, I think. Leibniz comes in for criticism on this front all the time. He gets satirized. Voltaire's Candide satirizes the best of all possible worlds argument, and Schopenhauer targets it here too.
Yeah, Schopenhauer is going right in on the problem of evil, saying the level of suffering in experience is so immense, and not like constant and intense suffering, just that like even when something good happens and you get what you want for a little while, you're immediately unsatisfied again. So if like our existence is what he says is it's the most ill-adaptive to the purposes of a good world, we are perfectly suited to an evil world. And if the world is evil, why is it so? And then we're not, we're going to have to skip over a bunch of this, but the fall, it's our fault that the world's evil, not God's. But
actually, the fall is like his favorite part of the whole Bible. He likes that part. He hates all of these rationalistic explanations of like why there's evil in the world and how we can sort of square that with God's, all wise, all good, all powerfulness. And Leibniz kind of has the most cogent explanation, but Schopenhauer, basically for him, evil is suffering, evil is pain. That's all he really says. He says there's no physical connection between these two things, the sin of the world and the suffering of the world. But he says it's metaphysical. Like evil is kind of metaphysically related to man's sin, and hence the world is just filled with suffering, and that's the normal way of it. And in this section on the sufferings of the world,
which is what we read.
Yeah. And he starts off by saying, pleasure and pain, right? Like joy and misery, all these opposites. Like misery and pain is the positive thing. He says a lot of these philosophers have assumed that pain is like the negative, like the absence of pleasure.
Can you explain positive and negative? Just because the way we use positive usually means like good feeling.
Yeah,
no, added, like additional.
Yeah. So for him, like happiness and satisfaction is like the end of pain. He says it is the good which is negative, like it's the absence. He says, in other words, happiness and satisfaction always imply some desire fulfilled, some state of pain brought to an end, which actually really put me in mind of, Charles Peirce, right? He says, like, belief is the absence of doubt. So even in Peirce, although he intellectualizes it, he's not doing what Schopenhauer's doing here with pleasure and pain, but, doubt is that positive state of irritation. And our struggle to achieve belief is to remove that irritation. So belief is like a state of quietus, a kind of, it's kind of a zero state. So that's like here too. Pleasure is just like what's left behind after you've gotten away from suffering. So suffering is the positive element. It's what's, I don't know, actual, real. Maybe those are the wrong words.
Well, like neutral, like without them, there's neutrality. There's like nothing, and then pain and pleasure are like additional things.
Yeah, like we seek pleasure, we think it's something positive, but we're actually, seeking the end of our pain is really what's happening.
This goes back to the Christian, but I think kind of like Greek philosophical Christian, which is most of it because of where it originated and grew. But good is a positive state. Like, Plato, the true, the good, the beautiful. These are realities. They're real things. And then evil doesn't have its own existence. It's a negative existence relative to good. Same with falsity. Like there's a thousand kinds of falsity, but only one truth. So the less truth you have, the more falsity you have. So one is the normal state is anxiety, want, need. It lasts very briefly. And then we're back to suffering or wanting or needing something else.
Yeah.
And even if we got all of our needs fulfilled, right? And our basic needs, as he says, are just animal. We want to be warm. We want to have
food, shelter,
sex,
water, clothing,
place to live.
Sex.
When we get those things, then we immediately start looking for something else. So the pleasure is dwarfed in comparison to the want, need, suffering. So that's what he means by the satisfaction or the pleasure is the exception to the rule. It's the negative, and the positive state is suffering. Not the positive state as in the one you want to be in, but the more real thing in the world is, in this case, evil. So it makes no sense for him, out of all these religions that he goes through. Zoroastrianism has a cosmic good and a cosmic evil, and they're constantly in conflict. This makes sense to him. The world is this shroud and cloud that is blocking the way to enlightenment. This is Buddhism in his estimation. This makes sense to him. But the world that is created by a fully good, fully knowing, can tell the future God that just sucks almost all the time, except for a few little dots along the way where you actually get to experience temporary and fleeting pleasure. That metaphysically makes no sense.
Yeah, I liked that. I mean, I thought it was interesting. Even those basic needs, those biological needs, like just pure sort of pain of the body and pleasure in the body. Yeah, like when you don't get enough food, when you don't get enough sex, when you like all those things, that they cause pain. Like the absence of those things, when your needs aren't being fulfilled, you're in a sort of pain, in a sort of misery, suffering, and you go out and you try to get rid of those things. And then with humans, like he spends a lot of time comparing like humans to animals here too, and how humans are so much more capable of feeling suffering and misery than animals are, because we have all these extra things that thought and consciousness adds to the picture, like hope and honor
and
memory. A lot of what we do is out of he says we have this like machine for condensing the pleasure and pain into our memories and recalling them throughout our lives, and also anticipating pain and suffering as well. And even just the anticipation itself causes more suffering in us. But then he talks about hope as well. But I mean, you do a lot of things because you're worried about what other people think of you. You're worried about your what we would have once called honor, or maybe reputation, and that causes you a lot of anxiety, and that's a kind of misery as well. So we want to go out and like sort of, get people like us, do things, achieve things, get people like us, because we're driven to do it, because we need this kind of recognition.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I read this essay way back in the day, and I've always found it to be pretty compelling. I mean, I do think that he's actually, I don't know. I mean, maybe I shouldn't bother nitpicking, but I think that some of his observations like don't cohere with my experience. Like for example, one of the first things he says is that like the kind of satisfaction you get from the things that you're excited about are never as good as you expect them to be. I think that's true. But then he says those things that you're scared of, that you're like, that you think are going to suck, end up sucking way more. That I disagree with. I don't think that that's true at all. I actually think that usually we work ourselves up and we think that that thing that's going to be hard is going to be really, but then when you do it, it's not as bad as you thought.
Yeah, we
So I don't
find
know, that maybe is
pain to be-
nitpicking. Maybe that's nitpicking, but I feel like he's just like, he's putting the most negative spin possible on things. And I think he goes a little far, at least from my experience. I don't know. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
all the things that I'm usually worried about, you get it done that you think are going to suck and they're not as bad as you thought they were going to be. I don't know. Do you guys disagree with that?
Yeah. No, I can see that. I can see that definitely. But I also find it kind of compelling. Like when he says, the anticipation of pleasure is in
Mhm.
itself pleasurable, but
Yeah,
then
that's
that kind
true.
of minuses off the pleasure once you actually experience the pleasure you're anticipating. It like minuses the pleasure off, which made me
Well,
think
this
of like
is-
movie hype, right? When movies get overhyped and you're like, oh my God, I want to go see that movie. It's been so hyped. Everyone's telling me it's good. Then you go see it and you're like, oh, it like
Yeah,
wasn't
Dune
as
Part
good,
2 fucking
right?
sucked. I didn't like it at all. I thought it
Yeah,
was
because shit
boring
gets
as hell.
overhyped and that like minuses the pleasure of the experience off of it.
I love Dune 2.
Dune 2 was so boring.
I saw Dune 2 with Eric, and when we walked out, I said, this was probably the best experience I've had in a movie theater since like Avatar 1.
Really? I thought Dune 1 was way better.
The three best movies I've seen in theater, like theater movies, are Avatar 1, Mad Max Fury Road, and Dune 2.
It was a good movie experience. I thought it was slow at first, but then it picked up.
I thought the pacing was all off. It's neither here nor there.
But anyway, as soon as you experience the pleasure of Dune 2, then it just tapers off and disappears, and you're back at your default anxious, trying to find things to make you happy state. And he goes into
Yeah.
other stuff too, like our existence, our life is dependent on killing other life in order to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need to eat, so you kill plants and animals, or have a giant industrial system kill them for you. So even our positives require another negative. We're mixing up those terms, but even the good things that we experience depend on someone else's suffering.
Or I wonder if you could say it's a privation of the good.
And this is the way the entire world has been set up. And the question is just at bottom, if you were an all-powerful being and you were fully good, is this the world that you would have created? And his answer is, of course not.
Yeah.
Happiness, it exists, but it's not the normal case. When you are happy, if you're happy for too long at one time, he imagines heaven, right? He imagines a utopia where the birds flying around are already cooked. Everybody has exactly what they want. What would take over in heaven? You'd be fucking bored. You'd be so bored that you start making drama and stirring up strife with the people that are around you, because you can't live in a constant state of being happy.
Yeah, this reminds me of Lacan a lot. Like, a lot of the stuff. But I think Lacan offers a more precise, better account of the kind of futility of pursuing desires. And because I think also, like, you do enjoy the desire. That's another thing, because Schopenhauer kind of frames the desiring part as tormenting. But like, I don't think that's true. I think we love desiring things. I think we fucking get off on that shit hard.
Well, yeah. That's the complicated relationship between, like you desire something and you sort of experience pleasure just simply by anticipating that desire being fulfilled. But then sort of the pleasurable experience of having that desire fulfilled then is actually like reduced because you've already experienced so much pleasure desiring the thing. That, I can see it's like the objet petit then there, because it's like, oh, that like wasn't really all. So much of what we do is to stave off boredom. We go out, we seek entertainment to stave off boredom, because boredom is also harder. Animals, like they never have this problem in the wild, but when you like put them in a cage or domesticate them and don't give them a very like rich environment to live in, like the smarter animals will experience boredom too, visibly. And like zoos and shit, I guess, really developed intellect on that.
I love that he talks about brutes also.
Yeah,
It's like-
brutes, animals, lower forms of life.
What does he mean by? I thought he meant like indigenous people by brutes. Isn't that?
No,
Was that the wrong
no.
interpretation?
It's animals.
No?
Brutes would refer to animals. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. I totally thought that he was talking about like tribal people.
This is why flat or plants have the happiest life, because they don't know anything. And then as you go up the scale to the brutes, that's the future. We feel pain over things that haven't even happened yet or that don't exist anymore because they happened so long ago. So humans are just like a well of, I don't want to say suffering and misery, because we use those terms colloquial to mean something like intense pain.
Yeah.
But the way he says life is suffering, like just think of how long, and yeah, working to prevent even pain that just might.
This is a pretty painful picture of the world, isn't it?
Yeah, but they shouldn't turn to Christianity, because in Christianity, God cares about you, and a short and intense punishment for the crime of being born. And all of the other religions explain this better than Christianity does, because Christianity has this all-powerful God who's all the way good, and yet nothing in experience aligns with that. If you have this explains your experience a little bit better, because you experience bad and then you experience good, and you go, okay, thank you, Ahura Mazda, for that little gift of pleasure.
But isn't that on the assumption that people want the best? I don't think that's true, though. People want an explanation that's going to be the most comforting, i.e. Christianity's popularity.
Right? Like, is it more like Leibniz's sort of best of all possible worlds thing, where, that's the belief we want to have, that, God created this world with the amount of misery and suffering in it in order to sort of like maximize the good, like God was like min-maxing here, which Schopenhauer disputes? Or is it, this idea that like life is suffering and Christianity is like these, that this world was created like for suffering, not for redemption, not like suffering is like the accident and like the good is the normal thing. But like the world is like a mistake, right? And the creation of humans is like a mistake. He quotes like this poet Claudius saying, "Cursed is the ground for thy sake." And it means like suffering is like the gift, but it's ultimately like kind of absurd. There's no argument you can make through Christianity that would also sort of explain, this is another weird part of it, that would explain why God created the world. He says Leibniz couldn't explain this. Why? Because there's so much misery and humans are so obviously imperfect and are like a parody of what they should be, that clearly like this is not a great explanation for why God created the world. The better explanation is that it was a mistake. It was like an error.
We're waiting on redemption.
Yeah. Like his take is that the Old Testament, which again, he thinks Judaism, insofar as Judaism doesn't believe in like the immortality of the soul, and that we're anticipating again this sort of afterlife that seems to be part of this. Like there's like this sort of afterlife we're looking forward to, we're anticipating it, right? So the mistake that like pleasure is the good thing is the positive element here rather than evil or pain. So we live in this world, we endure this suffering. The Testament represents man as under the dominion of law, in which, however, there is no redemption. Check. But then Schopenhauer says, but the New Testament declares law to have failed, frees man from its dominion, and in its stead preaches the kingdom of grace to be won by faith, love of neighbor. So he says, like, he likes those things, like love of neighbor and self-sacrifice and stuff, but he just thinks that this way of sort of thinking of suffering and pain as like a side effect or an accident is just not the way to it. We have to look at the world as an accident and suffer metaphysical beliefs. That's what he says right at the beginning. Unless suffering, its aim. Says that right out.
But we can fix Christianity. And he says that he's fixed it. He's meaning, if you suffer now, it's okay, because for the rest of eternity, you're not going to suffer. But true Christianity, he says, is it's written about you, then it's good as a religion. And then the question remains, how do you live a good life? Because this is full of Jesus' teachings without all the heaven and hell bullshit. And hermeneutically, it's pretty unclear what heaven and hell really mean to him anyway, as compared to later Christian mythology. It's more about this charity and forgiveness stuff. And forgiveness is especially important. You forgive everyone for what they've done to you and for what they are going to do to you, even when they are trying to kill you. So suffer and don't believe that anything other than suffering is normal. Don't get too attached to anything good because it's going to pass away. That's kind of Schopenhauer's philosophy of life. Just start out with better off not existing, and you're just going to be way more forgiving and accepting of other people's failures because yours. So don't stress too much about the good and how other people are supposed to act towards you.
That put me in mind of Stoicism on the one hand, but it also made me think back on our sort of philosophy as self-help episode too. Like Schopenhauer is really sort of offering up his philosophy as like, you know, if you thought this way, then like all the suffering in the world wouldn't be such a surprise to you, right? Like if you're going around believing in this like infinitely good gods and like that, you know, the faults in other people are like a privation of the goods, and that like if only people were just better, then like the world would be a great place. If you just gave up all that shit and like took his view that the world that it's just like a big mistake, then like you'd actually be better off. You'd treat other people better. You wouldn't be so anxious. Yeah, he's like really offering this up as like, well, he even says, he starts one of the paragraphs saying like, if you want a safe compass to guide you through your life and to banish all doubt as to the right way of looking at it, you can do no better than accustom yourself to regard this world as a penitentiary, sort of penal colony, as the earliest philosopher called it.
Everything's a prison.
Yeah, it's just a prison. It's
but you should expect that it's a prison.
Yeah, and like not something to be escaped from, I guess, too, because it's in like a denial of the will to live, or like it's about denial, not affirming life as like this awesome, great thing, and it's so pleasurable. It's like turning away, denial, asceticism, he thinks is the truth here, and that he says the rationalists will twist this to suit their purposes. Your Protestants and rationalists will twist this sort of Christian asceticism to suit their purposes, which I assume that the rationalists would include people like probably Leibniz and maybe Hume as well.
Well, you know, Nietzsche is going to get very pissed off about this later.
Yeah.
And say that he's just a pessimist. But yeah, he said like the book, The Will, his most famous book, The World is Will and Representation, is that like all things that exist are just these will, or is an aspect of will striving. And for him, this is the second volume of that brings the Buddhism in, which is the best use of your will is to will as little as possible, because will is ultimately the cause of your suffering. So, you know, hedonism, it won't work, but also putting your will into a heaven that doesn't exist, that's not going to work because you're never going to experience it. So the best way to live is to will to not will, which is still willing. But that's the life advice here.
And then just to put the contrast on it too, he says like animals cannot help but will, you know, when they have these needs and desires, like they just sort of go out and fulfill them. That's like they're just driven by this instinctual drive. There's no way for them to deny the will, but humans kind of have a way. we can sort of through our consciousness and our intellectual grasp of these issues, we can sort of separate out the will and learn to, you know, I guess deny our will.
So, but important question here. How is this going to help us fight wokeness?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we circle back to the reasons that these people are becoming...
Yeah, we don't really talk about brand much.
I really also don't know why they're specifically becoming Catholic. I said we wouldn't use the word grifter, but it just seems to be there's more of them.
There's a theory with Russell Brand about the fact that he's got a lot of sexual assault allegations against him right now. So that could be one explanation.
Yeah, they are the best at covering that kind of stuff up for sure.
I don't know, or like forgiveness, who knows? But I sent you guys this article from the Christian Post, which I assume is like some sort of a Christian blog, and it's by this guy David Hoffman, and the whole article is like, did like Russell Brand just got baptized, but what does it mean? And it's like him talking about how he doesn't believe it, and that Russell Brand is still his reasons for doing it is basically like he's just interested in mystical witchcraft, and to him Christianity is just like another like new age form of witchcraft, and he's not like an authentic Christian, which was kind of funny.
And there was all that article in there. Oh, and I was just watching a video with him, and then he advertised this like 5G blocker technology.
Oh my god, I saw that too. That was crazy. It's like a
like it like I don't know, it helps things like get in tune with your biological energy.
Convenient to him, and that's kind of what this Christian Post article is arguing.
Where the left was deciding whether to let Russell Brand in.
Right. And what was he complaining about in that too? He was complaining about the vampire castle, that people are snipey with each other, right? Like it's the same sort of complaints about wokeism. It's like they're moralistic.
He was being problematic in the working class background was what the argument was.
Yeah, that was more about his like working class background from in like London or something, and I think just like him being kind of yeah, exactly, just like brash.
And that interview with that news anchor really impressed Fisher as well, where you know, Russell had all these like quick comebacks and sort of this working class thing going at that point.
Charm.
Yeah.
And he still talks about that stuff, by the way. Like even now, I was watching some of his videos. I was like, has he totally turned his back on that stuff? And at least rhetorically, he's still talking about that stuff. It's just edging towards more and more conspiratorial things.
Emancipatory and stuff. It's just wearing these strange clothes. What strange clothes it wears these days.
Well, he's their problem now.
Who's? So the vampire castle was correct to not let him in then.
Yeah, maybe. And
Fisher wanted him to be let in, I think.
Yeah. Well, no, I know that's what I mean. I'm saying so the vampire castle was correct.
Yeah,
good job.
It might have been.
Good job, leftist vampires.
Dude, that was my thought too.
Because that's the thing. Like accepting God is the last or one of the last steps anyway, that you're powerless in the face of God and blah, blah, blah.
I think he's perpetually searching for something to alleviate his pain better, probably.
Non-existence will. Death will. But other than that, this is the last ditch effort, because here you assign all of reality into the line. But this is different from some of these other converts who are doing it for strategic reasons, because they want I want to say like the community aspect, or just the backing almost. You can fight a war if you can. I think he's
no, not with Brand.
No, I know that's clearly the case with Seeing Christianity. I think even in one of his recent videos, he sort of prefaced it. Appeals to all those categories. He talks about them, and then he's kind of like, well, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was or something, which is kind of funny because
Eisenhower's answer, but I think it would be that they both, right? Like, you know, the world is the mistake. So if you just took this view, you know, you could really deal with the imperfections of other people. And the targets both have that too. Wokeism, you know, maybe in its worst straw man form, is like a hyper moralism, calling out people for being folly men commit, be their shortcomings or their vices what they may. Let us.
What does forbearance actually mean? Is it like not being hasty?
Yeah, it means like don't, you know, restraint. Like don't do
slow to judge, maybe.
Yeah. It's like exercise restraint when you're going to censure somebody else, you know, to judge people negatively. What you're really doing is like, you know, projecting your own shortcomings onto other people and then judging them based on that. It's a kind of defense mechanism.
And if you have access to an infinite pool of faults to judge, every day there's
yeah. Ultimately, you'd have a list there of the things that you don't feel satisfied with in yourself, right? The kind of person that you want to be, or the kind of person you think other people should be. So you condemn your own negative features when you see them in other people, but it's a lot harder to condemn yourself. So you kind of displace it onto other people and distance yourself from it. And I think Schopenhauer's kind of making almost a early version of that kind of psychoanalytic argument.
For sure. And of course, Nietzsche ended up picking up on aspects of that as well. But yeah.
It's kind of crazy to think like this is 50 years before Darwin, 70 before Freud, 100 plus from existentialism from there. And of course, he hated Hegel. So that's a point in his favor.
Yeah. I think part of that was just no one was interested.
He called him a state bureaucrat.
Yeah, and he was really mad at Fichte too. Disappointing, but he loves Kant. He thinks nobody's surpassed Kant.
Well, why don't we men in a true light and reminds us of what is most necessary of all things: tolerance, patience, forbearance, and charity, which each of us needs and which each of us therefore.
Yeah, I kind of liked that actually. Yeah,
me too.
Stuff going on in here. He's for eating meat, but he's against making animals suffer.
Yeah, exactly. And he says something. He's like, whenever I see like an owner with a dog on a chain or leash, whatever, and he's like, I just feel this intense disdain and anger.
Yeah, I feel the deepest sympathy with the brute and burning indignation against its master. Yeah.
Because the world is will and representation, but the will part of it is what conjoins, we're all aspects of the same fundamental force. The prevenient thing is will. We feel it much more acutely. We feel it consciously, which is why it sucks to be this accident of a human. But it's kind of there's a basis for the interconnection of all things. And I think this is probably why he ends up with Buddhism being the most tolerable metaphysical system.
Yeah, the will to live underlies the whole world of phenomena. That's what he says.
If the world was just made and then you were given consciousness to exploit everything else for your pleasure, it's just kind of the Christian view. Go name everything and you can use it for whatever you want. I'm going to destroy it in the end anyway. That's it's much less of an emphasis on the interconnection of all things as opposed to fitting yourself into this hierarchy of domination where you have God at the top and then the church led by the Pope. It's a draw for Catholicism.
Christianity in general, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think selfishness and individualism and kind of callousness towards animals and other creatures on this earth, right? That all sort of comes from this. I mean, it's justified by this survival instinct, this preservation of life. But I mean, people are like that, right? Everyone kind of fears their own death. He talks about death and this anticipating our death, and it's something that freaks us out, and we all think that we want to live. But there's this way in which, and even Brand says this, right? It's like he's trying to find a way to pry out the sort of selfishness, the self-aggrandizing, the idea that, like, you know, you do something in a way to make yourself more famous or to benefit yourself somehow. And for Schopenhauer, I think that's ultimately comes down to sort of this will to live, this survival instinct, which is, and so the denial of the will would be kind of learning how to not want to live so badly because, I don't know, life is misery, life is suffering, the world is a mistake, and man should not be here in the first place.
Yeah, the Protestant work ethic is one response to that, but this is more like, well, the Christian response, I want to conclude on this, but the Brand response is, I can reduce my selfishness because I am nothing in the face of God. Whereas Schopenhauer's response is, actually everything is nothing. This whole thing's a mistake. There is no God. And that should reduce your selfishness in itself because you know that you are a breath of air that will come into existence and disappear. instead of focusing on this futurity, or instead of focusing on the coming civilizational war between the United States and Iran and China. Anyway,
Yeah.
why don't we wrap it there? There's a sort of catharsis in reading philosophical pessimism. Do you find?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, even though I quibble with some of the ways that he frames things, I mean, I think he's definitely onto something. I was always broadly sympathetic to Schopenhauer, even though I think he goes a bit too far. And I even though I personally feel, as someone with, as we've talked about before, I kind of have a sunny disposition, and like some of the things that he talks about, I'm kind of like, I don't really feel that way, but I also do know what he's talking about. So
He does say that stupid people are easy to please.
yeah, exactly. So I guess I'm a fucking idiot.
Yeah. We should all be a little stupider, I think, because
Yeah, maybe.
intelligence is a curse.
Trust me, it's pretty good over here. Honestly, I'm a very content guy over here.
All right. All right. Good up, guys. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Head over to the Patreon if you want more. And that's it.
Yep. Let us know what you think.
Yeah. Life is suffering.
Yeah, maybe become a strategic Christian or a strategic nihilist.
Read some Eastern philosophy.
It's all simulation anyway. It's all right.
Exactly.
Peace.